Cormagat Cahirlock and kids or chase Paul Moragul sauce and Deshve gum Lord and British is Spill a starula ta on Stokata Gnevery agus Polichoria kind fuin an overshaw the Quidva Blienta agus Hogshe Factus Father Harter Truck a Blind or Rindina could you come in and point to show agus is ma an rod agus tigum goil dina tá imni agus Brent Bortaka agus is ma an rodi goil mead against Donnchadh nish gur féidirling gníomh hút de tull an phobal mar a dhéanach sa léir liling an referen agus goil in deise going inis Fuyera rockdiach a chur bun atá ag an críláige cúnamh agus takeíocht de maná de sláinte agus saoil maná agus is tócha nach méid an brú nó an éigen ortha dul agus asanna nó éonad cosúla sin dhéanamh faoi mar atá ann faoi láthair. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to speak on this bill before us today. It's a piece of legislation that's been a long time in coming to the floor of the Dáil, and one that the majority of the Irish people wholeheartedly endorsed in May of this year, and with that a burden and a blemish on the face of the state, indeed of the Constitution, has been wiped away. The 8th Amendment of the Constitution should never have been in the Constitution. I firmly believe that abortion should never have been dealt with in the Constitution. This is the right way of dealing with it. It was an entirely inappropriate way of legislating on the matter. As the Attorney General at the time, Peter Sutherland, predicted, it has caused great uncertainty. And indeed, to read the text of the provision that was the 8th Amendment, it was in some respects nearly a contradiction in terms, and that is the uncertainty that it created. Indeed, it has caused significant harm, I believe, to women right across Ireland. The former Master of Holles Street, Dr. Peter Boylan, told the Joint Committee on the 8th Amendment of the Constitution that it has caused grave harm, including death. As was stated at the time of the referendum, many deputies have stated that this need not be a bitter and divisive debate, and I hope it won't be. In some respects, the last few years has seen the best, and this debate has seen the best and the worst of Irish politics in some respects. Some people, I think, took this campaign as an opportunity to say intemperate things, intolerable things, but also I think that people on both sides of the debate, many of them exercised great restraint, understanding, compassion, and as I say, understanding and being able to put themselves in the position of other people, and indeed of people who took different views on this proposal. It's quite remarkable that we are here in some respects. It would have seemed even 8 or 9 years ago, this debate, that we are now in a position to legislate without being having the fetter of a constitutional provision. We are in a position to legislate in a measured, reasonable and compassionate way on this. That would have seemed impossible only a short few years ago. Even as recently as I suppose the last Dáil term, the protection, the legislation that was passed to legislate for the X case, the full name, the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Bill, seemed a significant step forward and seemed contentious, whereas now already it seems so far out of date, and indeed it seems archaic and inadequately compassionate, and an excessive, far excessive restriction on the rights of women and pregnant people. So it is remarkable how much has changed in that regard. Agus go pointe suntasach tá an cúisle sin sto go chánig an reachtaíocht isteach breis truc ó bliain ó hin inis, agus is tóca bhí sé cóhéags áire agus bhí son go pointe áirithe bhí daoine géirí buntáiste bhainte cóhéags an polítíocht den am, agus de bhí chuir an referendums cór an pobl agus ghlach go gleis agus sin mar a bhí an bunreacht ó hin go dtí ónam sin go dtí inis. Ach fiú ag an am agus is fiú ahananta a thuirtóid bhí cuid bhdaine chur a gcuine an foráil sin agus de bhí níor sin fuirist agus tá creidmheas duldas na daine sin agus tá ahantas dul dóibh siúd mar is rud cróga a bhí ann dul a gcuine an sruth de túraíocht peblií a bhí ann agus cuid bhda na daine sin atá fós ann tá siad ag trid a gcuine an 8ú lasú feig an trucha no breis trucha bliana sin. The Eighth Amendment has a long and unfortunate history. I think it was conceived in a context of perhaps a number of elements, but to a large extent, I think, a cynical attempt to gain political advantage at a time of tight Dáil arithmetic, and that was exploited. And I suppose there's credit particularly due at this point in time to those who stood in a minority position at the time, who in very difficult circumstances would have found that their opinions would have been very much marginalised. And I think it's important, I suppose, in this context that the minority now need to be respected, and if they hold a contrary view, it's important that they are allowed to express that view, though I don't share it. That they are allowed to express that view in a reasonable and respectful way. But it is the case that those who were in the minority position at that time were certainly marginalised and certainly suffered, I would say it's fair to say, intimidation and some quite, I think, yeah, intimidation is a good word. And some of those people nonetheless remain steadfast and joined, I suppose, in the recent referendum by people who have only recently got the vote, or some people who don't have the vote at all yet. Those people who fought against the Eighth Amendment all those many years ago have been fighting ever since. And I think a lot of them are, you know, it may have seemed impossible at one stage, but it was through their perseverance that we are in this position, that this constitutional blockage on the ability of the Oireachtas to legislate for this matter has been removed. I think it's worth saying as well that, you know, there is credit deserving to many members of the Oireachtas for the fact that the referendum was brought forward and passed, and that includes opposition, includes government, includes parties, includes independents. But the primary credit for the fact that we had a referendum and that the referendum was passed was due to a mass movement that started with a small number of committed activists, but developed and grew and took in what ultimately became quite a wide and representative cross-section of Irish society. I think to read media reports from even only a year ago and anticipating the referendum, you would have expected that it would have been, you know, a relatively narrow coalition, or that it wouldn't have been fully representative in the way that it was. But I think the length and breadth of the country, the margins of it passing, I think surprised many, but it was a reflection of the fact that this was backed by a very broad range of society, and yet again Irish society has been shown to be well ahead of this institution and ahead of politics. In terms of myself, I suppose it wasn't always my view that legislation of this kind would need to be passed, but I remember in particular, I think this is probably something that, you know, was true of many people. I was working in Leinster House at the time of the deaths of Savita Halappanavar, and I think that had a profound impact on very many people. It certainly had a very significant impact on me, and while that in and of itself didn't overnight change my mind, it did force me to examine the basis of my position or my beliefs at that time, and to read up and examine more, and I did over several years. And at this point in time, I suppose the fundamental basis, the two pillars maybe of my position on this is, firstly, is that the priority in all instances needs to be the life and the health of the woman, and secondly, that it is wrong, and it is, I believe, a violent act to coerce women into carrying to term against their wishes. And it is on that basis that I was somebody who is very much in favour of this legislation, was very much in favour of the referendum, and I hope that this legislation can progress, and it can progress while not taking an inordinate haste, that it can progress relatively well. And obviously a lot of the detail of that will be in the committee. I suppose I would recognise it is important that we take stock of the vote that took place. You know, on Machen agus on Trumlock of Iawn of over Lassu den on Ashgary Innover Noctu Lassu ní ook grevend in Asulish agus fi an Suntas agus is righteous moor o pobl na Héireann on Adina of Iawn agus stolam gwil sé ceart gwil dina in isig ahant gwil gur hór gníomh a chóirt de tull na Dine, go chóir de Dine fiú nach glachan nó nach raibh a bhábhar an nar vótáil I bhábhar an referend go naithníonn siad go caithfidh an institiúid seo an Dáil agus an Oireachtas agus an Seanad go caithfidh sé an stocha ghlacha leis an méid ráid an Dine agus é a chuir tríd agus is son tá sé is maithan rud go bhfuil Dine a ráid sin fiú Dine gur chur gona an referend. I want to acknowledge that there are people who have spoken this afternoon who have said that they will, despite having voted no, will not oppose the passage of this legislation, and they're taking I suppose some stock of maybe some amendments and so on and the detail of it, and that's fair enough, that's legitimate. I do think it is legitimate to vote against this legislation even after the referendum. I think it's legitimate, which isn't to say it's right. I think that clearly the referendum was on the ability of the Oireachtas to legislate, and that is what the people have entrusted us to do. That is what we must do, and that can take many different forms, and indeed over the course of the coming years there may be attempts to review this legislation, there may be amending legislation, and that could take many forms. But in that context I do think it is legitimate for people to oppose this legislation. Having said that, I believe it is the right thing to support this legislation. I believe it is the right thing to do because I do think the will of the people, or at least obviously the vote had a formal legal effect, had a formal statement to specific questions that was asked, but I think it's fairly clear as well what view, in the context of the proposals that were published by the Joint Oireachtas Committee and by the Government, I think it's clear the direction that people felt that legislation, the shape it would take, and I think it's important that people give effect to that. So, as I say, I think I do respect, I do have a lot of respect for people, and I'm sure it's quite difficult for people who voted against the referendum who will now not oppose this legislation. I think that's a brave thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do, but I think it's an important thing. Stoka just I Dave roint this na sunry for in billa. Ta roint stoka gnéthe tá roint caint faoi agus sin beidir an am fannacht agus cadíanaid na dochtúirí an bhfuil cadacha nó an bhfuil sé réúnta dóibh gan dailá leis an córas seo agus le héadaí agus tá tócha ó Dave se de tuigim beidir go pointe áirithe cadéon túraíocht faoi an tréimhse fannachtach is tóin go croíonn sé níos mó faibanna ná réitíonn sé beidir. In terms of some of the specifics of the legislation, I would say we would have a concern that's been expressed by my colleague Deputy O'Reilly in relation to the structure of the bill, which has brought forward and I think changed maybe the emphasis of the bill from the general scheme that it is now, that it kind of starts out nearly with offences rather than taking a view that it may be more health related. Sections, the offences have been moved from section 19 to section 5. That's not generally the case with other legislation apart from maybe criminal law legislation. So I think that is something that maybe is not particularly a good indicator. There has been a fair bit of discussion in relation to the waiting time, and I suppose the 3 days, I think we need to be guided, I think, by, and I think the Oireachtas committee, to be fair to them, and the great work. I have two members of the committee next to me. I see others in the chamber as well. I think it did excellent work and give good weight to all the evidence that was heard from all perspectives. But they were guided, I think, to a large extent by the views of medical professionals. I think we need to be as well, and I know that medical experts such as Dr. Peter Boylan and the representatives of the Medical Council and the Irish College of General Practitioners have commented on this as well. So Sinn Féin will be guided by that. I think it is, to some extent, maybe a political decision, and it's maybe optics, maybe to some extent. I can, to a degree, understand the logic behind it, in that any significant decision, I don't think anyone takes lightly. And personally, you know, I believe that if you're going to take a significant decision of this nature, if you can, you should reflect on it as best as you can in the circumstances. But we are already operating in this legislation in where there is a framework with you're dealing with a clock, so to speak, that you're dealing with 12 weeks to a large extent. So to put in that, then another qualifier, I think, creates difficulties. But it also creates difficulties, I think, for people who are in particular crisis situations. And I think, to be honest, while it may be a thing that perhaps some individuals might see that in an ideal world, they might take time, they might try to take that decision as best as they can. I don't think it's something that we should be legally enforcing on people, because I think it's most likely to have grave unintended consequences for certain individuals, and I think we need to be conscious of that. I'm also conscious of the conscience issue, and I respect, I suppose, that there are many people who will have in the public, but also GPs, who will have a lot of difficulty with this legislation, who will find it morally difficult. I think that Section 23, subsection 3 is appropriate and will protect conscientious objectors, and I think that's reasonable. But like, the public accesses apart from A&E, accesses our healthcare system through GPs. That is the avenue, that is the way we expect them to flow through our system. So we can't expect people who may not know the philosophical or moral position of a GP, we can't expect that somebody goes to their local GP and ends up in a cul-de-sac. They should expect that any GP they go to will at least be able to direct them in the right way through the system. And I think that that is a reasonable expectation, and I don't think that it is an unreasonable ask of people. I think a balance is being struck here in terms of conscientious objection that is fair and reasonable. One or two final issues in the time that I have left. I support the proposal that has been made by a few people that the wording should reflect pregnant people as opposed to simply women. I think that's reasonable. I think it gives, in terms of inclusivity and respect for all pregnant people, I think that's important. I also think we need to, some things that are related to this matter are legislative, other policy related. The committee that examined the whole area of the 8th Amendment gave a lot of time to ancillary services. That is vitally important. We need serious investment in counselling and support. We need serious investment, and you know, like, I mean, the whole issue of sex education was examined, and like, I mean, clearly that's outdated, unregulated, and of a different era. That clearly needs to be addressed. The final issue I would raise as well is, you know, it was a requirement in this jurisdiction that there would be a referendum. There is no such requirement, I don't believe, in the North, and I hope that it will be possible at some stage in the not too distant future that we will be in a position to have legislation of some kind similar to this going through to allow for a similar regime in the North. The North has to be next. It is one of the key issues that needs to be addressed in terms of many of the outstanding issues politically in the North, but it's clear that the public appetite in the North isn't that radically different from what it is here, and I think that all parties in the North need to reflect on that, but also the British government and the Irish government. I believe this is a human rights issue, and it's something that needs to be addressed. Therefore, to sum up, I am Táimsásta the takeíocht de Huirtan Rockdaíocht seo beg Oireachtaí sa Chiste agus ag céim an tuairisce is tócha ag scrúdú na lasathe go bhfuil hí go mbeidh á tuairt chun cín ach go goiteanna is dóil an ghfuil cíl réasún agus chothromaíocht leis an Rockdaíocht seo agus dá bhar be mise sásta takeú le.